So the number of workers on contracts are on the rise. 38% of workers in the education sector are on contracts. I think that statistic, I heard that and I thought, like, you're kidding, you know. So the people in the education sector, we're talking teachers, the people who are tertiary educated, and also the other workers in that sector, the education assistants, the admin support at schools and also in universities. It's a big issue as well. So look, I mean, I think looking at the education sector, like we've got a growing population here in WA, more kids that need to be educated. If anything, we're going to need more teachers and more education workers. Yet more and more people seem to be on contracts. A lot of teachers are on 12-month contracts, fixed-term contracts, so they'll end at the end of the school year, and again you're in that situation where they don't have pay for that long summer break, and then they'll have to reapply and hope that they get a job at a school the next year. I've met, our union represents school officers in schools, and I've met people who are on in an even more precarious situation where they're on 3-month contracts, so it's a school term contract, and so they don't know whether they've got a job in 9 weeks' time or whatever, which is just outrageous. So, and it's just so that the government or the employer doesn't have to pay people for holidays. So look, I mean, that sort of brings me to one of the myths about insecure work, and something that we've been talking about a little bit at my workplace about, this myth that the public service is the last bastion of secure work. It's just not the case. I mean, like, as we can see from that example in education, a huge proportion of people on contract, and look, I've got some of my colleagues at the end of the table here who would be able to attest to the fact that workers in the public sector, you meet people all the time who are on contracts, people who are casual and part-time as well. But yeah, I was reading a report today actually released by the Public Sector Commission regarding the WA workforce, and the report noted that in 2010-11, permanent positions represented 47.5% of all advertised vacancies in the public service, compared with 51% for the 2009-10. And that corresponded with an increase in the amount of fixed-term contracts offered as well. So there's just a direct correlation there where there are more contracts advertised and less full-time permanent positions advertised. So look, casual and contract are just two forms of insecure work, but I'm sure the other panellists can talk about the other forms of insecure work. And yeah, look, I'll move on. In terms of why we're facing this situation, I think we need to sort of analyse that. I mean, I think this is part of the capitalist agenda to shift risk onto workers. So rather than, than business bearing the ups and downs of the business cycle, the capitalist cycle, what actually happens is that workers are bearing that cost. So when times are lean, the boss can just, get rid of you, and then, hire casuals and bolster the workforce with contracts and casuals and other forms of people who are on insecure work when times are good, but at the same time, workers actually don't get any share in those profits, a comparative share in those profits when times are good. So it really is about them shifting risk onto workers. Because they don't want to pay you sick leave and holiday leave, and they don't want to pay you superannuation and workers' comp and other entitlements. So if they can get out of doing that, they will. Insecure work also gives bosses way more power over their workforce. So workers in forms of insecure work are less likely to know their rights, and they're less likely to stand up for their rights. They're less likely to join the union. And as we can see, insecure work becoming more widespread, it's really part of this capitalist strategy to de-unionise, I think. In particular, in relation to the public sector, I think the issue of privatisation and outsourcing of public sector functions, that's also a real risk and a real deterioration of good, secure work. When you look at the public service, it's comparatively fairly well unionised compared to other industries. Good, fairly good wages and conditions. When public services are outsourced, they're outsourced to not-for-profit companies that are, less well unionised, worse pay, worse conditions, and same when functions are outsourced to for-profit companies like Serco and all of those other lovely companies out there. So look, I mean, it's a big risk at the moment with the Barnett government. That's our state government, really on this push to privatise government functions to not-for-profit organisations and also big multinational companies. I think the other reason why this has happened is that there's a real lack of regulation over insecure forms of work. So basically, casual work and contract work, employers just employ these people willy-nilly. It really should be. There should be a regulatory framework that says you can only employ casuals in this situation. You can only employ contracts to fill a vacancy when someone's on leave, or you can only employ a contract to carry out a specific project for a specific period of time. So I think government bears the responsibility for this problem, by not having that regulatory framework. But I do think the union movement does need to look at it as well and kind of go, all right, we haven't exactly policed things the way we probably should have either. So, but I do think that that the problem is with government. I think if we just look at the effects of insecure work on the worker, it's all the sort of things that we would expect. So, like I said, they're less likely to join a union, less confident in raising workplace issues, like health and safety, for instance. They're less aware of their rights. And personally for that worker, there's no steady or guaranteed income. There are fewer opportunities for training or advancement. It often leads to increased stress because they don't know when their next paycheck is or whether they'll be able to pay their mortgage. And poor work-life balance, all of those kind of things. And many forms of insecure work mean that there's no access to basic entitlements that the union movement has fought hard for. So paid sick leave, annual leave, long service leave. There's a whole section of our population that just does not get a look in on that stuff. I think we just have to also keep in mind that this doesn't affect all workers equally. I think women as a particular subset of the workforce are really affected by insecure work. There are more women in casual and contract and other forms of insecure work, and often it's because it's the only way that they can achieve flexibility to look after their kids and that kind of thing. So frequently they're taking poor jobs with low pay and low conditions so that they can achieve that flexibility. And in terms of the WA public service, it's comprised mostly of women. So that report I referred to before by the Public Sector Commission stated that 69.2% of the workforce WA public sector is women, and 30.8% is men. So and that's a significantly higher portion of women in the public sector compared to 45.5% of women in the Australian workforce as a total. So, and look, a smaller proportion of women than men hold permanent positions. So 68.7% of women hold permanent positions compared to 77.1% of men holding permanent positions in the public sector. So, female-dominated jobs tend to be jobs that are more insecure, lower pay, poorer conditions, and recalling that example of the education sector I talked about before, that's even true of skilled jobs, like people who go to university and get a teaching qualification. It doesn't guarantee you any form of security. So that's sort of effect on that sort of set of workers. In terms of the effect on families and communities, you see people struggling to repay loans and mortgages, or even to get a loan or a mortgage if you actually don't have a permanent job. It's quite difficult. Sometimes workers might have to take on an additional job to make up that income, less time with their family. They find it hard to plan from week to week. Sue told me about an example about a worker that couldn't had to pull their kids out of after-school activities because they couldn't budget for that week to week. So I mean, even kids are suffering, even in that sort of flows out into that's less participation in community sports and arts and other sort of things that we need in our community. And I'd also say political activism, less people are willing to actually get out there and think about bigger picture issues if they're worrying about day-to-day bread and butter issues. So, and then there's also the impact it has on I guess public money in terms of it's more people accessing welfare, reliance on welfare. And that's true when they retire as well. If you don't have a superannuation fund that's big enough to support you in retirement, then you rely on the government to pay your pension, and charities as well, reliance on charities. So all these kind of flow-on effects. In terms of what's to be done, like that's kind of the hard part that I don't really have an answer to exactly at the moment. I think that unions need to fight for more flexible work arrangements. This sort of myth about flexibility, is something that, is really part of this capitalist ideology of this is why you need these casual and whatever sorts of work part-time because you need flexibility to fit in with your family and look after your kids and all that stuff. Well, I think, the majority of people would prefer permanent, work that they can rely on. And you can actually achieve that flexibility with permanent work. I think we actually do have some fairly good conditions in the WA public sector. We do have flexible work arrangements that people can access, flexi time and different forms of leave to accommodate their family life, but also provide them with that security. The issue, though, is that not a lot of people access these for various reasons. Some people think that if they access these arrangements, it will kind of set them back in terms of their career and it doesn't look good. Some people don't access these forms of leave and certain arrangements because their workload issues are simply too high to allow them to take that time as well. So I think there's a few issues there as well. Just because we win something, that's not it. We've got to make sure that that people are able to use these things to better themselves and their careers and their lives. I think unions need to also, getting back to that issue of enforce provisions that they might have in their awards and agreements about certain situations where contracts can be used, for instance. And as I said, I do think we have been a little bit slack in terms of really enforcing that stuff. And as a movement, I think we could be campaigning for legislative protections, that really do regulate when those things can be used and make sure that there is actually a legitimate need for those forms of work to be used, because most of the time there just is no legitimate need. There's no reason why that job can't be a permanent job. And look, I guess the key thing is obviously what we need to do is address the power balance between workers and the bosses. We need to win back power. We need to rebuild the union movement. Make sure people are aware of their rights, and importantly, make sure people stand up for their rights. I think we also need to challenge this ideology about flexibility. Like that old kind of thing that capitalist class kind of wheel out, and they've sort of really, it's kind of dominated public debate, their view of flexibility. So we need to be out there sort of promoting what real good work can look like. It can be fulfilling, and I think, importantly though, it's about power, and it's about workers winning back power to have control over their own lives. So I guess, look, I'll leave it there, and I've gone on too long, but I hope we can talk more in discussion. Yeah. So.
Well, just to give a bit of a brief background, I'm actually a boilermaker by trade. That's what I actually do for a living, and a position that I hold in the union is both Vice President, and I'm on the State Council and State Conference of Union, represent that union at the Trades and Labour Council. And also too, been on and off a job delegate convener at times as well, and have been for over the years. And yes, I'm a member of the CPA now for about 6-7 years at the same time. I think it's important that if we're talking about secure employment, think at this time now, all over the world, you can see workers have been in instant struggle with big capital all over. Be it if you're in the public sector or if you're in the private sector. It's at the moment in the UK, there's over about 2 million workers, especially in the public sector, on a general strike, which I think it's been happening a lot now, and it's because the impact over there of the current crisis is they're really feeling it. And it's basically in Europe as well, and you're seeing it happen in the United States, and no doubt you're really starting to see it happen here, and it's happening in little bits and pieces. When just to give you a very quick, when I entered the workforce, I did an apprenticeship. I did a 4-year apprenticeship. You had to complete a full. Yeah, it was everything. All the costs were covered by the employer. Both your books, your yearly technical books, and your TAFE fees, or technical college we called it back then. And now you're seeing what's happened with the trades now. Even too, they've de-skilled them to a certain point. In fact, all we're doing is producing young assembly workers. We're not actually producing tradespeople. I won't say tradespeople. And yeah, usually in a 3.5 year period. It used to be 4 years ago, and about 40 years ago, it used to be 5 years. So you're going to see this whole de-skilling of the whole workforce happening and further. Casualisation, yes, in our industry, really hit us hard in the last 30 years. And I think in a part of the way it was our fault too. We let a few things go. I think traditionally in the blue collar field, I wasn't too sure in the public sector or white collar, but we used to have what we called the book system, where we actually had control of employment. And what happens if you were out of work, you pop down to your union office, look, I'm out of work, your name was put in the book. As soon as the first job would come up, you had, you of course obviously wait in line behind others that might have been there longer than you happened. It was actually very significant on the waterfront industries, both in shipbuilding and repair, and of course around the Waterside Workers Federation and painters and dockers and all that. And it was just an interesting note. It was like from yesterday's rally, and I was just thinking things on the way home, and I thought that's actually one thing. Actually, all unions actually ought to think about having a bit of a struggle again. Let's get control of the employment again, and let's get the book system reintroduced. It's going to be a tough fight. It's not going to be easy. It's got to be, but nothing's an easy fight. I wish it was easy. I wish it was virtual negotiation, but it's not. It doesn't work like that. I've only been one negotiation, and the employer said yes. He didn't realise what we're up to, and I thought, oh, that was good. That was great. So we got what he wanted. He only realised after he signed off that he gave us a 10% pay rise over 2 years and all these other things. That was only a one-off. That was a one-off. We got him, the beauty on that. But that was that. The thing is, that's I think what's one of these key fundamentals of the union, and I think we should get that back onto it. And I was from yesterday's rally, which was actually very important. It was actually about fighting for full employment again. We need to get that back on the agenda, because what's happening? Yes, you're seeing the larger casualisation part-time, but and what's happening? Your whole employees, your multinationals, whatever, are just getting more and more control over everything in their lives. From the moment you wake up in the morning to the time you go to bed at night, we're completely dominated by them, one way or the other, by big business. And we need to get that so to start fighting back to get some control. And I thought it was something a little bit interesting just recently too that happened. Our union's been involved in Victoria. It was over Heinz. Now what Heinz is doing is it's now a major multinational food company. It's closing all their operations down and want to move to New Zealand. What the workers have done there in conjunction with the community, want to form a cooperative and take it over. And I think that's starting it might be a small change, it might be a little crack in the chain there, but I think that's important and significant. The workers have got to be fundamentally in that important struggle to take it over. And I think that's something we've got to have a look at again, that workers need to get back in control, because all that power and all that thing we've had has just been taken right out of us, and now we're having just a struggle just to try and even get our children trained up now. So this is where we're at the moment, and day by day, as these economic crises are getting worse and worse, and they're coming a lot more frequent now and a lot more intense, you'll find the multinationals and that what we're pretty much ruled by are trying to protect their super profits more and extract more out of us as much as they can. So anything, if they can get away paying you $10 an hour, and then so be it. What they don't realise is the less we can afford, the more that's being produced and the less we can afford, well then they've got a major catastrophe on their hand. So this is what's happening, and it's like Claire pointed out, it's that we're being able to less and less afford what's happening now. And just on that, yes, our utility bills are going to go up. It's not just thanks to a government, but I think it's the forces behind it. Our water, electricity and all those other basics are going to go up even further. And Barnett came out with that's blatantly, just rudely, arrogantly, they're going up regardless of what it is. So that those things, and of course, on working people have got those concerns on their hands. That's probably the body is lowering the cost of living, and then trying to repay back a bank with the mortgage and everything else. And you're going to find that too. That's going to start, unfortunately, happening. It's happening over east, and it's happening in other westernised countries as well now. That the fact is, the plaintiff or the sheriff goes around with the notice from the courts, right? You need to vacate your facility, house immediately. The banks have got seized it. You're going to see that happen here too, sooner or later. At the moment, I mean, those in the mining sector might think they've been doing all right, but the question I'd put to them is how long will this last? So I think overall it's got to be a joint thing too with unions and the broader community as well. And I think, I look at something like Your Rights at Work and Union Solidarity. I thought that was a classic example where we all pulled together and trying to get some change. And I was having a look at that. This is what we sort of needed. Some of these key things we needed to struggle is get back some control again, and not just some control. I think all control. Back of our major industries and our way of life again, because it's all been ripped away from us and we've been dictated to. Now this is how it is. You can see what's happened. Unions been pushed into a corner, we've all been ruled and divided, and now it's like, well, it's obviously the writing's on the wall. If we don't actually pull together again and fight back, then we're not going to go anywhere. We're just going to be completely more enslaved. I think it's good to see there is a secure jobs campaign comes out. I think well done on that, and I think it'd be good if we can actually get a good united type front campaign on the full employment job security. It's vitally important. It's not just about me personally or any of us around here at the tables, but it's generations ahead. I think on that too, I think we've also sometimes had to deal with these, not just the key economic demands we're looking for, but I think it's sort of, well, what sort of society and what sort of future do we want as well? And I think that's some of the question we want, because when we do have a few wins, believe me, there's an old little saying, what they give to us now will always be taken back. And an old fella taught me that one time when I was an apprentice. So he said, oh yeah, so the gains now can always be taken back any time, and they've got the power to do so when they have to. So I think it's something I think it goes down to a deeper level of understanding. So, well, who runs the show in this country? Big business, or is it workers along with the unions and everything else? So that's what it's going to come down to sooner or later, and I think people are going to have to wake up to the fact that's just where it's happened. So just to hear the demands of this stance, I think one of them is get back to union control of employment again. Bringing that, it's not going to happen overnight, I'm sure, and I think I think everyone depends on where industry and what conditions are at the time, how we're going to struggle. But I think instead of just one or two unions doing it, I think actually it's got to be all of us together and find it in a good key thing. I think that's one thing, because it's like I've had this problem before trying to seek employment and everything else, and of course now what employers have got in our industry, and of course it's very similar to construction. All the unions involved in it. We've got a system called ERMS. It's a system where they've actually a few multinationals have set up so they can check your employment history. Now what you do when you hand your resume in for a particular project or wherever, or a particular big engineering firm, they check it. Now if anything in your resume is not correct or the date's not precisely correct, bang, sorry, we won't be considered for employment. On the other hand too, what they've strategically done now is our demobilisation records, how they've kept it, and what they do, that's the other bit we need to actually seize control when we are demobilised from major projects when they finish up, or what's happening, is to get that, because what's happening, like myself and many of others have been blacklisted out of particular industries, but from our political views, yes, our political views, and also to, even for people just generally speaking up about certain safety issues, or even just being, or a union convener, delegate, or whatever. And this is, it's quite a common thing quite across the board now. And so we've got two ways they've been trying to attack us, and it's actually this demobilisation thing. They share it with the other companies, but they don't try and keep it secret. And it's a whole mountain of molehill. It's a mountain and a half, not just a molehill, but a mountain and a half just to try to get to the demobilisation records. This is what they've actually said about it, so we can try and change the course of things. So what they've basically done, they've set everything up so it comes down to they've got everything under right control, even just, look, no, we don't think you're good enough for this job or whatever. And mind you, it's interesting when they were talking about the visa work and everything else, I mean, that's another thing, the reason why they bring him in. They've got an easily controlled workforce. The visa worker, yeah, sure, he may even quit his job, but he's got 28 days to find another job, otherwise back on the plane and go home. And what employers have been doing now, a lot of it is greatly increasing, is withholding their pay. And it's been happening for a long time. What was originally over east, where I'm originally from, in Sydney, a lot of actually that foreign labour was controlled by criminal international crime rings, and this is actually quite scary stuff. A lot of them were threatened, their families were threatened, anything like that. They come and do a job in Sydney, and then they are sent home and possibly even disappeared when they go back to their own country. So that they were under that certain thing, that under security. So if they're even under the visa worker, even though they speak up, there's that certain fear even when they go back and whatever else. So we've got to also too band with them and bring them under our wing as well and look after them. We've got a huge task ahead of us, and I think that's the first thing. But I think out of all, what we've got to do is get some sort of unity around common issues. I do believe, union control over employment, I think it's a very fundamental one, and job security. Personally, my opinion of this with Chevron and the rest of them, I wish they would bugger off and we'll take it over and we'll train our own kids, we'll train our future generations, and we'll get the wealth back in here, not into the boardrooms in New York and London, so we can actually expand that. So, however, I mean, it's a starting point, and this is going to be a long struggle. It's not going to be an overnight thing. But mind you, we're not alone. It's an international one as well. So it's not happening. And even with, as you guys in the public sector, be it Commonwealth or state, it's happening in every other country too. Where public servants are under extreme attack as well. And interesting, I was talking to someone about Greece the other day, where Greece and all those Europe, like the PIGS group of nations, that's Portugal, Ireland, India, Italy, Greece and Spain, they're coming to the point where they're unable to pay their public services, their servants. So it's not only just people in the private sector no longer getting any money, it's also them as well. So they're basically being crippled. There's no way forward. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. So I was just going to start with, like most, I guess I'll use the term loosely because I'm getting older, but young-ish workers.
Not that hot.
I'm not that young anymore. But I had my whole work history has been based around insecure work. So the first 7 years that I worked, I was casual. So annual leave was something that I'd heard of. My parents had it. It seemed like it would be nice. But if I went on holidays, I didn't get paid. If I was sick, I didn't get paid. And that was for 7 years. And then I went from casual work to a fixed term contract, and I thought that was awesome because suddenly I got sick pay and I got annual leave, but also that kind of goes along okay until something like the global financial crisis happens, and the first people to be got rid of are people on contracts, because you don't have to be paid out, there's no redundancy pay. So if you're in a kind of situation, well, anyone in that situation, you've got no kind of even leeway around the edges with some redundancy pay. I remember talking to my mum at the time, and the other thing with that I should add is that and you get a bit older and you start looking to think, maybe I'll look at buying a house, and it's pretty tough now getting a mortgage when you're on a contract and there's no guarantee that you have ongoing work. So it kind of hadn't bothered me at the time because I was young, I didn't have a mortgage, I didn't have kids that I had to look after. But this is somebody who in Australia, in a country, I'd had 13 years of insecure work and knew no different. And I remember talking to my mother at the time. She's a very staunch member of the New South Wales Teachers Federation, who are just about as militant as the MUA, I think. And having this conversation with her, and it's exactly the situation we find ourselves in now, where workers have fought so hard for all of the conditions that we have that people in secure work have. And we know that none of these conditions are, none of these things are handed over very willingly by the employers. We fight really hard for everything that we have, and they're increasingly applying to a smaller and smaller group of people. And partly I think at the moment unions aren't, we're not blame free in this. So there's a smaller and smaller pool of secure workers, and for unions it's much easier to organise people that are in secure work, because people in insecure work, there's a huge turnover. So you don't, whereas a public sector worker, you might have to, you go out and you join them up, they become a member of their union once and they'll stay a member of their union for most of their career. In insecure work, there's huge turnover in the industry, so they've traditionally been much harder to unionise as well. And so unions are starting to look at this with varying levels of success. But it is an issue that unions are focusing on more and more, because the fact is that the secure work portion of the workforce is smaller and smaller. So I think Claire and Dave have done a great job of outlining the issues, and they are pretty huge. And so I'm really excited that we have, the ACTU has recently launched a campaign. It's called Secure Jobs, Better Future, because this issue is absolutely huge, and it affects so many families, the majority of families throughout the country, and the impacts on, as Claire said, on communities, because people are less able to commit to things outside of work because they don't know when they're working. It impacts on huge stress on families, and also in terms of just the workers themselves. People in insecure work generally have lower pay, even if they might be on a slightly higher hourly rate. They have lower pay. They're less likely to have access to training and skill development. They have a higher risk of occupational health and safety and injuries in the workplace. They're less likely to be aware of their rights and to be able to do anything about them. It's quite hard, asking somebody to stand up to their boss when they could be fired like that it's a pretty big ask of somebody. People who aren't employed securely often feel like they're second-class citizens in the workplace, and that's certainly something that I know. I worked in one workplace where some of the staff were permanent and some of us were casual, and you feel like there's quite a distinction there. The other thing is that the increasing prevalence of insecure work has the ability very much to undermine conditions and pay rates for people in secure work as well. So this is not just affecting those workers who are insecure, it spreads across the industry. So the Secure Jobs Better Future campaign, there's some materials on the table to have a look at. But basically what we're calling for is, a secure job is one that has fair and predictable pay and hours of work. So you know roughly how many hours you're going to have to work in a week. You know roughly, within a kind of small margin, depending on overtime and things like that, you know how much money you're going to have at the end of the week. So you can budget, you can work out what kind of house you can afford if you want to buy a house. You can work out exactly what kind of things you can do with your extra time. You have access to conditions like annual leave, like paid sick leave, like overtime, penalty rates, all of those things that we've fought very hard for long service leave. There are career development opportunities. You will pick up skills, and there's a career development path along the way, and you have a healthy and safe work environment. So when employers on the one hand will talk about flexible work being, the benefits of flexible work, we actually think flexible work is very important as well, as Claire said, but you can have flexible work and a secure job. Those things are not mutually exclusive at all, so we have to really fight quite hard to take that turn back. That's what a secure job looks like, and that's what every person in Australia should have access to. As we've seen over the last kind of 2 decades, I guess, Australia's had very impressive growth in terms of financial growth, GDP growth. Over that time, we've seen the gap between the wealthy and the rest of us widen dramatically. And over that time, we've seen in quite a significant period of time, the shift that we now have 60-40, 60% of us in secure work and 40% in insecure work. So that's happened at the same time. And we have basically workers taking home a much smaller share of the profits in Australia than we've ever seen before. With the campaign, the first part of this is a very compelling case. As Claire outlined all the figures, they're pretty shocking. The first aspect of this campaign is raising awareness of the issue. When you talk to people about this, a lot of people don't know the statistics. I didn't know that the stats were as bad as they are, and I work in the union movement. So I'm likely to have more of an idea than most. So I knew it was bad. I didn't know it was quite this bad. So the first stage is raising awareness of the issue, and that's happening at the moment. The ACTU set up an independent inquiry into secure work. So it's being run by an independent person, independent to the ACTU, and they're asking for submissions until halfway through December. So I think the submissions are open until the 16th of December. And submissions can be from unions, from individuals. It can be as simple, writing a submission can be as simple as a letter talking about an experience you had with insecure work or a friend has had. Basically, they want to get just a lot of data about the impact that this has on people's lives. So that's the first step in this. But the idea is, that we have the Your Rights at Work campaign was, we kind of saw how powerful it is when community and workers and unions come together with a goal, a common goal. And after that campaign, all those kind of activists, all that community activism kind of fell away a bit. We weren't very good at capitalising on that and building up those, kind of maintaining those community groups. So we want this campaign to be as big in terms of community engagement as that campaign was. The other thing that some unions are starting to do more and more is put into their agreements things like targets, and that may vary. So it may be that I know the Maritime Union has some of their recent agreements where they've had a lot of labour hire people and casual staff. They've put in place conditions where they'll say that at any one time they have to have, it can be no more than 20% of the staff working are casual. And as a staff member, if you work over a certain amount of hours, over a certain amount of weeks in a row, you'll automatically qualify to become permanent. So there's an industrial strategy that will go along with that as well, and that's putting more and more of these agreements, of these conditions into agreements so that you actually are making it difficult for employers to use it. Because when people's casual, the idea behind casual work is that it's you kind of filling in around the edges. Over 50% of casual workers work over 30 hours a week and have been doing so for up to over 5 years. That's not casual. That's a permanent job. 5 years you're working over 30 hours a week. You have similar hours of work each week. That is absolutely not the definition of casual work. Casual work was never meant to look like that. That's a permanent job. You're just not getting treated like you're working a permanent job. So putting these kind of conditions into agreements means that there's room to transition people off from insecure work to secure work. This campaign, the Your Rights at Work campaign, was a very successful campaign politically, very good at motivating people in the community, but we didn't actually grow the union movement out of that campaign, and we're in a situation in WA where union density is 17%, so 17% of workers in WA are in the union. Everything we do has to be about growth. People in insecure work are the most at risk, they're the most vulnerable. As Claire said, they're least likely to know their rights. We have to be making a concerted effort to organise workers in that area to give them power by standing together. So we'll increasingly, unions that cover workers largely in insecure work, there's going to be an increasing push to organise workers in those areas, and the ACTU's got resources available to unions that are looking at campaigning in those areas around that. So we want to kind of the idea with the campaign is that it assists individual unions with what they're already doing, but also that we have a coherent message and that it turns into a multi-union campaign. Because we were very powerful as a movement during Your Rights at Work, and there's no reason why we can't do that again over this issue, but this will be a much more kind of long-term campaign as well. The other thing is that ACT is looking to run some trial industrial relations cases, so testing out the things like when people are employed on a casual basis, when it's clearly not what a casual workplace looks. So testing out some of those things and putting some good cases together to challenge some of those existing workplace arrangements. And there'll be political asks along the way as well, so that's still being developed. The idea is that it's quite flexible at this stage, so this is kind of a feedback phase, if you like, so raising awareness of the issue, looking at what's already happening in terms of what unions are doing, but also getting a feel from community groups as to where we need to take this. So feedback is welcome. That's probably, I think, all I should add, sorry. This document, I've only got one copy here, but it's downloadable from the website, and it's got a lot of the kind of information, background around the issue and why we're doing this and how it's emerged. It's pretty interesting reading. From this, there's a Secure Jobs website, Secure Jobs Better Future, There's also a whole lot of materials here, but and you can make a submission to the Insecure Work Inquiry online as well. It's pretty easy, so I'd really encourage everyone to do that. I just told you my story and I haven't submitted it yet, but I'm going to tomorrow. So, also, you know, we've all got friends, nephews, cousins, mates, family members that have probably been in similar situations. So, the more experiences they can get of that, and it could be as little as, you know, you couldn't afford to go on holidays with your family for as long as you wanted to, which certainly was my situation. Anything like that, that's all really, really useful to help build the case, and to some of these stories will be, you know, the Your Rights at Work campaign was very successful because it used individual stories. People really responded to that. So if we can get those stories from the beginning to help kind of, you know, build that narrative, that's very valuable. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Madam.